Chargers general manager Tom Telesco took some of the blame for the defensive struggles in 2021, but could the depth have actually helped the Chargers this year?
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade. Joined as always, my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for almost 6 seasons, doing our own Facebook Live show to start Chargers Domination Live. Now we're going on our 5th season as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Well, what a weekend of football, guys. I mean, that was a crazy playoff weekend, but thank you guys for making us your first listen today. And to make sure you never miss a show, subscribe to the new Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. But we do want to talk about the end of that Tom Telesco press conference there, at least the defensive side of things, because last week we talked about Justin Herbert, Brandon Staley's decision-making, Mike Williams, and some of those other guys. But we didn't get to talk about Tom Telesco saying that the Chargers had a good depth, basically, last year, and that the depth helped them. He also talked about, maybe the transition from Brandon Staley's defense, from Gus Bradley's defense wasn't as seamless as he thought it would be, maybe putting some blame on Brandon Staley not getting his defense installed correctly. So that was some shade there. And we also had to talk about what he had to say about individual players like Uchenna Nwosu and Jerry Tillery, who are in very different situations, one's in a contract year, and also a couple of struggling players that will be back, like Kenneth Murray and also Michael Davis, too, who he expects big leaps from. But we have to start with depth, David, because that's something that really, because I saw that he said that he took the blame defensively, and I was like, okay, that makes sense, just because, personnel has to at least be a part of the problem if you're the worst defense in the NFL. Not the worst, but bottom 5 in the league. Yeah. Bottom 5 in the league defense. There have to be obviously other problems, especially if you have Joey Bosa and you also have Derwin James, 2 players that, all pro players when they're at their best. And it was just crazy to hear him say that he thought that the defense was actually a strength and actually helped them later on in the season, depth, David. Yeah. I mean, the depth, that's just something that's crazy because we raved about the depth. We knew the personnel was a problem. We knew those positions were a problem. And so to say on the overall football team, I don't see a depth issue. To me, the depth helped us get to where we were in mid-December. To be where we were with this football team, I just thought that was a little surprising to hear.
Yeah, definitely surprising to hear, but he's the general manager and he's going to try to make it look as decent as he possibly could. But I think if you look at every area where the depth really came into play for the Chargers this year, you would not see the results that you want. You saw a lot of injuries and attrition in the secondary. You had guys like Trey Marshall that had to come into play, a lot of Tavon Campbell that had to come into play. Those guys got targeted a lot and they got abused a lot. You looked at some of the guys that were rotating in on the offensive line. The one time they had to sub in for Matt Filer, it was an absolute disaster. So I just think, and of course the backup running back situation. So when you talk about the depth being an asset to the team, I think the only thing you can really cling on is saying, hey, our right tackle missed pretty much the entire year and Storm Norton, the backup, had to come in and play and at least kept us competitive. I think that's the only thing you can really put on your calling card when you're talking about depth actually being an asset when it comes to the Chargers this year.
Yeah, and I think if you were asking Brandon Staley, he'd probably be like, yeah, well, the defense with what I was dealing with gave us a chance to win, right? And Storm Norton gave us a chance to win, something along those lines. But what you're saying is true because those dudes were repeatedly targeted, right? Tavon Campbell, when he was in there, was targeted. When you had those other guys missing along the defensive line, when Justin Jones goes out early in the season, the Chargers are getting run on 180 yards per game. Totally. So I think that you saw that the entire season. And I think there's also some questions about the starting talent that you have as well, David, because even when we saw this team healthy, which was, healthier than most seasons, the timing for guys missing was obviously a little weirder. And Brandon Staley talked about that because you're missing guys in the front and in the secondary at the same time. But still, those guys coming in, the Trey Marshalls, the Tavon Campbells, all of those guys still ended up getting exposed when they were out there. And so did Chris Harris Jr., right? So did Kenneth Murray. So I think that's the other thing is, Kenneth Murray wasn't starting by the end of the season, but there was also some top end, talent issues as well when the guys that you do have on the field when everyone is healthy are also getting exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you look at every level, you have guys that you like at every level. I think you like what you got out of Justin Jones. You like what you got out of Kaiser White. I don't know if you were expecting that level of play this year, which that's encouraging.
Yeah.
Obviously, you love the fact that Derwin James was out there and he played as well as he did when he was available. Asante Samuel Jr. looked pretty good as a rookie. But then you look at some of the teams that are perennially winning lots of football games, that are in the playoffs. They don't have just one guy at every level. They have multiple guys, and they have quality defenders that can come in when they're rotating as well. That, I think, is the big difference between where the Chargers currently are and some of these other teams that are finding themselves in the playoffs year in and year out.
Yeah, and on tomorrow's show, too, we'll get a little into that just as far as what the Chargers can take away from what these playoff teams are doing well, how important is the special teams, right? Having good players on your defensive front. So we'll get into that, including some free agents the Chargers could potentially target from those playoff teams on tomorrow's show. But yeah, I mean, the starting defense, the talent just wasn't enough because there were just too many issues that even the guys that you were good with going into the season were not good enough when they were out on the field. And there was just too much of that. And obviously that happens when you're, 27th or whatever in scoring defense for the season and you're just as bad as the Chargers defense was. But there's still a solid foundation if you can bring the right guys back. I mean, Justin Jones, 3 sacks, a career high, was nice to see. Kazir White obviously was really good. And the Chargers have the, potential to really improve on this side of the ball. And I think, especially with what you've seen in the playoffs, you just need impact players defensively and guys that can make plays, because sometimes offenses are going to be so good that you're just going to have to make a couple of handfuls of plays per game and just hope that your offense can keep up. And I think that's part of the big thing there, David. And he was talking about the run defense as well, because Brandon Staley did say that, he was the front of his priorities for this offseason was improving the defensive front. And what Tom Telesco had to say about that is we weren't consistent enough by any means. We have to take a look at that, and we have to be better. Run defense is very important. Can't be bottom 5 in anything, right? But when he was talking about why the defense struggled so much, he didn't want to talk about the personnel. He wanted to talk about the transition. And he said it was more the transition. I thought the transition would be more seamless and quicker than it was. I actually thought it would take much longer for the offense than it would the defense. That's kind of how it worked out. So I thought that was kind of like, okay, so it wasn't the players that you drafted that were the problem. Then it was the coaches not being able to coach up the players well enough by the time they got to the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit of a cop-out there, because the general manager's job is to get the type of players that are going to fit in the systems that the coaches are bringing in. And both of these systems on offense and on defense for the Chargers are a lot more multiple than the systems that were used here in the past. The Joe Lombardi, the Saint-centric offense, that is obviously a lot more complicated. There's a lot more checks, a lot more different plays that are built in, a lot more freedoms. It's just a much larger playbook. And on the defensive side, there's a lot more different techniques that Brandon Staley is asking his players to learn and to master and to go out there and execute than, some of the cover 3 schemes that Gus Bradley had deployed the last several years. He was here as the Chargers defensive coordinator. So is it fair to say that you could see some progression from these guys as they're in these systems for another year? Absolutely. I think that's definitely fair to say. But, again, these guys are professionals, right? So they have to go out there and they have to get this stuff down. And, the Chargers coaching staff did their best to try to install these things like immediately as soon as they got in front of players. But I mean, again, this is the NFL, and these are very, very complicated systems to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did say that he thought a lot of players were going to make a big jump going into year 2. But the thing is other players under Brandon Staley, when he was a defense coordinator for the Rams, obviously didn't have that much of a trouble, picking this up, right? And you had guys like John Johnson, some other players, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, maybe those guys made it better for what he wants to do specifically, but they were the number 1 defense in the league, so they didn't have a lot of problems with it. What he did say is they weren't losing guys at the same time on the front and in the secondary, which who's coming in for those guys? The depth, right? But I think the one encouraging thing is with Brandon Staley, we've seen a shift to go more with what Brandon Staley wants in the offseason from Tom Telesco, right? And we've seen how much of an impact the coaches had on the free agent acquisitions. And last year, if that's anything to go off, it's going in the right direction at the very least.
And it's exciting, right? You're like, man, you like the type of players that they brought in the offseason. They were impactful. So if they do that on the defensive side, I think you got to feel pretty excited for what's to come.
Exactly, and that's what Brandon Staley was talking about, and I appreciated that. At least, he thought about that and said, hey, we were kind of like this on offense last year, and we
Yeah.
took care of that, and making sure Justin Herbert didn't regress was at the top of the list of things he had to do. Now
He
he has
sure
to
did.
fortify
Definitely did
everything
not
else.
regress.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's the thing with Brandon Staley, too. He was also like, we want to be bigger than you, in certain areas,
Yeah.
and stronger than you, and tougher than you, whatever. But, like, Tom Telesco said in his press conference himself, he's like, yeah, I'd rather focus on the edge rushers and the coverage guys, because basically I think that's more important. But I do know you have to be able to stop the run to get into those situations to let those guys succeed. So hopefully we saw, last year, the offensive in the trenches guys, got paid by the Chargers and drafted highly, like Rashawn Slater.
Building from the inside out instead of the outside in.
Right, and we know he likes the skill players, and, as we've also seen in this playoffs, you need a lot of skill players as well that can be explosive, and the Chargers definitely need that. But he did talk about some of the guys that were coming back in, some contract guys, including Uchenna Nwosu, where after you hear his comments on him, it's hard to imagine he's not going to be returning to the Chargers after this season with what he had to say, because that's definitely, I mean, if it's up to Tom Telesco, who it is, I think Uchenna is coming back after this. But we'll get into those comments and the comments about Jerry Tillery coming up right after this. But first, I need to tell you guys about my favorite protein bar and the thing that's been helping me with my New Year's resolutions, and that is Built Bar. And I mean, what I love about Built Bar, first of all, is that they taste great. Because for me, if it doesn't taste good, I'm not going to eat it. So get the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar with Built Bar, and find something that's going to be that secret treat in the middle of your day to help you get through that tastes great while also getting all the health benefits of the best protein bar on the planet, meaning a ton of protein, high in fiber while low on sugar and low on net carbs. And there's so many great flavors to choose from. I mean, there's so many, like salted caramel, you can go cherry barcia, you can go mint brownie, coconut almond, or you can go with some of my favorites, cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, so many flavors. And you can get a mix box where they'll send you all of the different flavors so you can find out which one is your favorite. Since you guys listen to the show, you can even save some money on Built Bars, because you go to Built.com, you can use the promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15, all caps, one word, to save money on the best protein bar on the planet at Built.com. All right, David, we have more of Tom Telesco's press conference to get into here, because it wasn't just him talking about the defense and underperforming potentially and overestimating, what he had there, but it was also some players that maybe you didn't see the development of. And that's the thing, is the Chargers in the past have, maybe put too much stock into, oh, hey, well, these guys that we have, even though they weren't good enough this year, by the time next year rolls around, they'll have developed and they'll be good enough, so we don't have to worry about that position. And one of the guys that I think is kind of in that is Jerry Tillery. And when you heard, Tom Telesco talk about him and Brandon Staley were kind of saying the same thing. Like, he didn't really get a true rookie season. It was basically a medical redshirt season. His second season, he got to play a little bit, but they were playing him at edge, right? And he was in Gus Bradley's system. And now he comes into Brandon Staley's system and has a career high in sacks, does, some good things, but obviously struggled mightily in the running game. But one thing that Tom Telesco said is just that everyone's not like Rashawn Slater. They don't all come out of the package as all pro players, and that they're all coming along at their own different pace. And so I guess it's just, David, now how much can you trust that Jerry Tillery is going to improve enough to make you feel better about what you have at defensive tackle right now?
Well, I think the same thing about Jerry Tillery has rang true his entire career. The biggest issue with Jerry Tillery is the consistency that has been the entire thing with him since his college days. You've seen
in run defense specifically too.
Yeah, and run defense specifically. You saw some spurts of greatness. I think you saw some reps this year where he was that physical, long, abusive type of player that you were looking for on the inside. And then you see him get ragdolled a couple of different times, and that's the biggest frustration with him is I think this year he got closer to having the NFL type body that he needs. I still think he needs to add a little bit more weight to be a little bit more functional in the running game. But that's been the problem with Jerry. It's been the consistency. He just needs to be a more consistent player going into this next year. And that's why I think when we're talking about if we want to continue the relationship, the business relationship with Jerry Tillery, that's the biggest question you have to ask yourself. Do we think he has the aptitude to really bring that consistent effort, play in and play out?
Yeah, I mean, because you do have the moments, with Travis Martin or from the Cowboys where he's just Zach Martin, where he's just picking him up and just tossing him out of the way, right?
Right.
Like you see, and like nobody does that to that dude, but then he's getting driven back by the right tackle, the third string right tackle.
Yeah, Terrence Steele.
Yeah. So that's like the perfect embodiment in the same game. But the other thing is too, I mean, Brandon Staley said specifically, like him and being more consistent in the run game specifically is what's going to define him as a player. And he said that, he knows who he is as a player now, and now that's going to help him going forward. And I can understand some of the learning curve of going into this year in a new defense. And he's also gotten better every season. It's just not been a monumental step, and that's what they need there. But I think we put a little bit too much on him because he really is their best interior pass rusher. I mean, he gets the most chances at it for sure. But when you look at it, it's crazy. I mean, this year he had 4.5 sacks. The rest of the Chargers defensive tackles had 5. Right, so he had almost as much as the rest.
Between like four guys, that's not enough.
Yeah, between Covington and Linval Joseph and Justin Jones, and that's what Justin Jones 3, and so but in the last 3 years since Jerry Tillery got drafted, right? Jerry Tillery has 9.5 sacks in 3 seasons. The rest of the team over those 3 seasons has 8. He literally in the last 3 seasons has 1.5 more sacks than the rest of the defensive tackles on the Chargers combined. When you take his out of the equation.
That is a snapshot of futility that you do not want associated with your football team.
Right. So I think it's just, if you had more talent up front, not only would I think it help him and get him more situations where you can't double team him and stuff. Not that he's garnering a ton of double teams and pass rushing situations.
Right.
But being around more talented players makes you better as well. And having better defensive linemen helps your linebackers make tackles, and then the run stop percentage and things like that go up. So it does all go hand in hand, David. But I think that's the thing with Jerry Tillery is with or without. I mean, even if he takes a big step, you still need so much more out of that position outside of him as well. And that's the depth and the starting talent as well. And 3 of the 4 guys, your top guys last year, so you have Justin Jones is heading into free agency. You have Linval Joseph heading into free agency, and you have Christian Covington heading into free agency. That's 3 of your top 4 snaps as far as defensive tackles this year. So are they going to bring those guys back, or are they going to add new talent to that position?
Hopefully the latter. Hopefully the latter. They need to add some more ability. They need to add some more pass rush. I think I've said it multiple times. If they can get a consistent interior pass rusher, that's going to make this defense that much more dynamic. I mean, if you get an interior presence with Joey Bosa on one side, Uchenna, and hopefully another pass rusher mixed in, that is going to be a lot more dynamic and a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see if Uchenna comes back, right? Because he's another guy who's going to be a free agent as well. So, I mean, we're talking about him as he's back. But it's a lot of the reason for that is because this is what Tom Telesco had to say about him in his end-of-year press conference. Love Uchenna. It doesn't matter what scheme you have, he's going to produce. He's a playmaker. He was a playmaker in college. He's a playmaker for us. We also talked about, making the play on Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, and obviously how he performed in that last game against the Raiders, where he was, the Chargers' best edge rusher in that game. And that game also included Joey Bosa.
He also said there is no part of his game that he does not like, and he also loves the player. So just based off of those comments, that's as close to saying from a general manager of saying, I'm definitely going to re-sign this player that you're ever going to get.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, he was really good. I think what makes you want to bring him back the most is just how good he was later in the season.
Oh, yeah, he was really coming on.
He really started coming on, and he really seemed to be getting a good grasp and bring all the things that Brandon Staley wants out of that position, which is getting in the flat and knocking down passes to negate some of that quick passing game, setting a physical edge for the defense. And he can do a better job of that, but towards the end of the season, him in run defense was really, really good. He was playing very well in run defense, especially in that last game. So I think that's the other thing, David. And also, he was 68 this year in pass rush win rate, which isn't great. I mean, he has to be more consistent. And that's why, if he was having, if he had 10 sacks last year, we wouldn't be having this conversation
at all.
The year before that, he was 14th, right? And the year before that, Joey Bosa was number 1. This year, Joey Bosa was number 8. So, I mean, Joey Bosa, obviously not the problem, but Uchenna Nwosu is still a piece that you feel like you really want back.
Right, and I think it's because of the overall toolbox that he brings to the table. I mean, and you really saw that on display as he got more and more comfortable in this defense. You can tell because he was really starting to make impact plays and really starting to help his defense. And, I mean, Chen has always been a good player. I think he's always had that ability, but it's like, hey, we need to see this throughout the season, not just in spurts. So hopefully he can build off that momentum that he clearly had going into the end of the season and take that and have that propel him going forward. Because if he can really figure it out as a pass rusher, the other elements of his game are very, very exciting. I think he's a very smart football player. I think he's a very physical football player. Like we said, I think he'd really started to get in there on run defense as well. So if he can really just figure that out as a pass rusher, this is a player, if you get him on a decent contract, that could far outweigh the value of that deal if he figures it out.
Yeah, and I think if you add another pass rusher into the equation, I mean, let's throw a hypothetical out there. A guy who might make his way into the conversation tomorrow, Von Miller.
Yes.
Say you bring in Von Miller, right, and you bring back Uchenna Nwosu. Yeah, that might be a pretty decent chunk of your free agent budget. I mean, but there's ways to get around it. And, I don't think Von Miller would come. I think he'd rather probably stay in LA where they're about to be in the, conference championship game right now. But at the same time, now you're looking at on pass rush and downs, potentially Joey Bosa lined up over the guard with Von Miller and Uchenna Nwosu on the outside. Jerry Tillery would be good as that fourth guy right there. I mean, anyone you could, if you get something like that, that's how you become an elite front and someone, that's really formidable. And the Chargers defensive front has really got more sacks last year. They had 35 this season. They only had 27 the last year under Gus Bradley. Some of the defensive numbers look better, but they only had 25 sacks. Before that, they had even less than that the season before that. So some things are going up, and they really need to fix the pass rush pressure and really add, especially to that front four, get some more talent there because it's going to help everybody out. And I think that's the exciting prospect and will really help, especially on third downs. But we do have one more segment to get into, and we have a couple more guys that we haven't got to talk about, like Kenneth Murray, who has really struggled. So we'll talk about what Tom Telesco had to say about him and another struggling player in Michael Davis, who he thinks will make another big jump going into next season. But first, I need to tell you guys about an app that if you don't have already, you guys are surely missing out. It's the Get Upside app, an app that's helping my listeners save up to 25 cents per gallon every time they go to the gas pump. And that's real. Every time you go to the gas pump, you could save up to 25 cents per gallon. And that makes it a lot more palatable when you can take some numbers off of that egregious board up there and really help yourself out, because some of our listeners are making up to hundreds of dollars a month from the Get Upside app, which you can get on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Especially if you're a rideshare driver, if you're a food delivery person, you're driving around a lot, this is going to save you a lot of money. Across the street, I'm saving a solid 19 to 20 cents every time I fill up my gas tank. And since you guys listen to this show, you can save up to 50 cents on your first fill up when you guys use the promo code TOUCHDOWN. That's touchdown, all caps, one word. You can take 50 cents off the number you see on that board. That makes it feel a lot better when you use the promo code TOUCHDOWN, and there's no downside to Get Upside. You can get the money directly into your bank account. You can get it through PayPal, and you can also get it in Amazon and other big gift card brands. There's no reason not to get the Get Upside app, guys, especially when you can use that promo code TOUCHDOWN to save up to 50 cents per gallon on your first fill up. All right, David, well, now it's time to get into a couple more players that Tom Telesco talked about. And last week, we kind of got into the offensive side of things, and I did think it was interesting what he had to say about these players and to just talk about these players as we head into the 2022 season, because there's decisions the Chargers are going to have to make, and there's just guys who are straight up going to have to be better, right? But one of those players is Michael Davis, who he did talk about. And it's funny because when you hear Tom Telesco talking about these guys, it's always like they have the stuff that we like with, Jerry Tillery. It's like he has all the tools. We like his length and all that stuff. It's like, well, you still have to go out there and play, right? The tools only get you so far. You still have to be able to be, have the technique, be disciplined, and do all of those things as well. But this is what he had to say about Michael Davis, trying to stay balanced because he made a lot of plays because we were asking about his struggles at the press conference. But I acknowledge his struggles this year. We love his skill set. We love his makeup. By the end of his contract, he was a really good starter in this league, talking about when they brought him in as an undrafted free agent. Change of defense, different things asked of him. He will continue to get better because he has the mindset, he has the work ethic, and the skills. Obviously, long arm, tall, runs very well, and he's athletic. Needs to make changes, and he will with time. So, David, are you buying that you could see a big leap from Michael Davis going into his second year in Brandon Staley's system?
Yeah, I'm definitely buying it for sure. I think Michael Davis has shown as an undrafted free agent his rookie year that he has the capacity to grow year over year. I think he's done that. He's gotten better every year that he was in that same defense that he was in. And I think going into a second year in this defense with Brandon Staley, with the coaching staff that hopefully is going to stay mostly consistent, I think he's still young. He's still a very smart player, still a very capable player. So, yeah, I'm definitely buying the fact that we can see a pretty good jump from Michael Davis in year two of this defense.
Yeah, I think you have to hope that once he gets more comfortable and knows, where his help is coming from and, when obviously to look back for the football, he
Yeah.
could get better. I think that's the big thing, though, because that is, a skill for defensive backs. I mean, guys are usually, good at finding the football when it's in the air. They're not getting their head back to the quarterback at
Well,
certain
we've
times.
seen him do it before. We've seen
We
him do
saw
it
him
before.
getting better, yeah, but that was a problem early in his career, and it was a problem late in the year. But I think the nice thing about that is that he was in good position for a lot of those, especially
Yeah.
late in the year. He did seem to be getting the leverages and things like that a little bit better. He just wasn't finding a way to make plays on the football. If he
Right.
can turn that around, plus, figure some of those things out, like what beat him. I mean, it was Hunter Renfrow in that last game. He runs disgusting routes, obviously, so it's only so much you
Yeah.
can hold against him. You hope somebody's a little bit closer than that,
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that is something where when he starts to really pick up the nuances of this defense, he'll realize, okay, when we're doing this, I can cheat a little bit here. Like I can cheat
Yeah.
a little bit more outside because I have help to the inside, right? I can shoot this a little bit faster because I have somebody else that's going to be covering this if I go shoot the flats and go up to make a tackle.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that could come with time. He's obviously athletic enough. He has shown more of a propensity to go hit people. I think that has to be something he has to get better at, is just continuing to get better in run defense. And I think he can. And we've seen him do it. It's just a consistency thing there. But there's no doubt about it, David. They're going to need him to be good because, I mean, we already know they need to bring in another corner.
Oh, yeah.
And use, decent resources to do that. Maybe two corners just to, get the kind of depth you need to be good against the kind of offenses that you're going to see in the league. But it starts with Michael Davis and probably Asante Samuel Jr. being good too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you need to get better play out of Michael Davis, but like I said, I'm pretty confident that he's going to be even better going into this second year. And the Chargers have premium resources to maybe bring in a young corner, maybe a free agent, or they can really add a couple in the draft. I think it's really probably best to add a couple in the draft because we know how expensive really good quality corners are in the NFL. They're getting up there with tackles and quarterbacks as some of the highest paid players at their position or just at any position in the NFL. So I think the best thing to do is try to get some good quality, young, fast corners in the draft, get them on those rookie cost-controlled contracts and, cycle them through the fold. I think that's what you need to do. Continue to add talent to those positions that are really changing the game in the NFL.
And I mean, it's not like if the Chargers decide to go out and bring in a big money cornerback that I'd be upset with it, right?
No.
You know what I mean? Like if they decided to push the bag in for it,
get JC Jackson, right?
Maybe that'd be kind of shocking to see somebody getting paid that much. But like we have seen some of those deals work out. I mean, we have seen the Darrelle Revises and people like that be able to move and still be successful in new spots. Stephon Gilmore was that way with the Patriots. Has done that a couple times. I mean, we've seen it happen with cornerbacks specifically, changing systems and still being good. Look at Jalen Ramsey, another really good example of that. So that's something that, they could look into as well, just because you can't have enough pieces out there and you just need enough guys to make a play, to pick off a ball, to, break up a ball, do whatever to stop or slow down some of these offenses that are out there. But one guy that we don't really know where he kind of figures into the plans going forward is Kenneth Murray, but we do know from Tom Telesco that he is going to be an off-ball linebacker because Telesco said, I think he can do some different things, but in the end, he's a linebacker. He had some challenges, but we love his skill set. We love his makeup. Proud of him playing edge for us. So I'm not going to really rip Kenneth Murray for, not being good on the edge because to make that change in the middle of the season.
Yeah, that's crazy hard.
Pretty much impossible. And I didn't really ever think he was meant for that, anyways. Me and David talked about in the middle of the season where I was just kind of I just don't think he's big enough or can shed blocks well enough to consistently play out there on the edge. But even when he was playing linebacker, David, he just wasn't good enough. And that's the hard thing going forward because they still felt like it seemed like they had to play him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an indictment on the depth that we talked about earlier on in the show. I think
I don't know if it's depth though, because Kazir White and Drew Tranquil, at least to some extent, were playing in that last game when they were forcing Kenneth Murray on the field as that dime linebacker. So
but you also saw a fair share of Amen Abagbamiga and also Nick Neiman on the field as well. I mean, this was not a good year for Kenneth Murray, and yes, he had the ankle injuries and he had the issues with COVID. But when he was on the football field, even when he was supposedly healthy, he wasn't really making great, strong reads. I mean, and that's the problem with him. I think you got to put him in a position to where he can really read and react, and that just comes with being more comfortable in the defense. And obviously, you can't really be comfortable in the defense if you're not on the football field to do that. So I think another year in this system for Kenneth Murray is going to do him good. He is a young football player. I do like his skill set. When in his rookie year, you saw him do some good things. You saw him show some aggressiveness. I think that Patriots game, it was probably his best game that he played, although they got blown out. I know that. I'm very well aware of it. But we saw some flashes in that game of the linebacker that could make a difference for the Chargers. So if they're able to really unlock that, then hopefully we can get some decent play out of a first-round pick.
Yeah, and I think you just have to wonder, like, how long you're going to wait, because and I think it's how much of the blame gets spread to where. Was how much explosiveness did he lose because he was battling through the ankle injuries, or because he was dealing with the effects of COVID, or whatever the case is. Those are things that are hard to quantify. But he just hasn't played well enough. I mean, even his first year, there was a lot of really bad games mixed in there, but at least you saw some progress towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
Then you switch things up. He said he was never comfortable in Gus Bradley's system. Now he goes into a more complicated system with Brandon Staley and plays worse this year. So was it the ankle? Was it, any of those things? But this year, David, I mean, he had a 1.9% run stop percentage, right? And so that's having an effective stop because he makes tackles, right? But are they effective tackles or are they far down the field? 1.9%. That ranks 96th out of 97 linebackers with at least 100 run defense snaps in 2021.
That's pretty damn near dead last.
Yeah. So you combine that with missing 19.4% of his tackles, 93% completion percentage allowed, a passer rating allowed of 140 plus. It's hard, to keep making the argument for him.
I know there's one man that's going to be rooting for him above anybody else. And of course, that's the guy who has his name tied to Kenneth Murray. And of course, I'm talking about Tom Telesco.
I think it just sucks because even with Kazir White potentially coming back, it still feels like you're a little bit lacking at linebacker. Yeah. It still feels like you don't really have the explosiveness that some of these other teams have that are really successful. And that's tough when you have five guys. Who are you cutting out of the five guys going into next year? Is one of them going to be the first round pick that you have? I mean, because even last year, like, he made a ton of tackles, over 100 tackles. He was still 70th in run stop percentage. So It wasn't like he was a dominant. And Denzel Perryman last year was second in the entire NFL. And that was the guy he was playing next to. So, like, it just hasn't been good enough. And I think that Tom Telesco really wasn't going to give anything there. But when you just keep talking about what these guys can do and their tools and things like that, it has to be more than that, David, or it's just not going to get it done. But
you can look like a statue, but I mean, you can be a statue of a warrior, but you still got to be able to be the warrior too.
Yeah, and I mean, he definitely looks the part. He had a ton of explosive plays when he was at Oklahoma. He can be a playmaker if used correctly. It just hasn't translated to the NFL at this point. But Tom Telesco did also talk about the special teams, and he opened up about how important punting is, and he talked about SDSU's kicker Matt Ariza, who was like all-world punting and kicking and doing everything for them. But he got noticeably excited about that. So Tylon could have some competition, I think, to say the least, especially because it wasn't just him talking about the SDSU, punter. It was also about him just talking about how bad the Chargers punt unit was and their punt return unit. But it was interesting. And obviously we're here to kind of translate all the Tom Telesco GM speak into kind of how we're taking everything. But I think we've seen in these playoffs, David, the Chargers need a lot more. So it'll be fun tomorrow to kind of look at what's been happening with these playoff teams and figure out what the Chargers could take away from it and potentially who they could take away from those teams.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to look at that because there's no secret that the Chargers special teams unit, although it got a little bit better this year, it's still nowhere where it needs to be. And like you said, we saw numerous examples in the playoffs why it's extremely important that your third phase is effective.
Yeah, ask the Packers. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow about some takeaways from the playoffs and also some players the Chargers could take away from some of these playoff teams. But until then, make sure to subscribe to the new Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. Thank you guys for making us your first listen today. The other way you can always make sure you never miss a show is to follow all of our social media. You can find the show's Twitter at LockedOnLAC. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also find our at Locked On Chargers Instagram page and Locked On Chargers Facebook page. If you guys want to get your voice on the show, the voicemail line is 323-524-7924, and we'll definitely keep getting into those during the offseason and getting into all of our drafting and free agency coverage we have coming up for you guys soon. But make sure you guys don't miss it. Follow on all of those places, and thank you guys for checking out the show today. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.